Morning I turned 26, I came downstairs to find my mother standing in the kitchen with a coffee mug and an expression I couldn't read. My professional stand mixer, the 7-quart Cuisinart I'd saved 4 months of tips to buy, was gone from the counter. So was my marble rolling pin. So was the set of Ateco piping tips I'd ordered from a specialty shop in Vermont. I noticed the empty space before I noticed anything else. The way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue before your brain catches up. "Where's my equipment?" I asked. My mother set down her mug. "Your father sold some things to help your brother with his rent." I stood there. I counted to 3 inside my head, the way my therapist had taught me, except I lost count somewhere around 2 because my chest was filling up with something hot and pressurized. "Some things," I said. She nodded like that was the end of it. It wasn't. Let me back up, because this doesn't make sense without context. My name is Wren, and I am, or I was at the time, 26 years old, living in my parents' house in Raleigh, North Carolina while I saved money to open my own cake studio. I'd been baking professionally since I was 19, started in a hotel kitchen washing dishes, worked my way up to pastry assistant, then junior pastry chef at a restaurant downtown that got a write-up in a regional food magazine. When the restaurant closed during the pandemic, I pivoted, started taking custom cake orders out of my parents' kitchen on evenings and weekends. Birthday cakes, wedding tiers, corporate events. Word spread. By the time I was 25, I was clearing $3,000 a month from custom orders alone, on top of my day job at a bakery on Glenwood Avenue. My parents had always been supportive, or so I believed. They let me use the kitchen. They bragged about me at church. My mother posted photos of my cakes on her Facebook with captions like, "My daughter made this. I thought we had an understanding. I thought the kitchen was, at minimum, a shared space." What I didn't fully understand was that, in my family, shared had a flexible definition that always seemed to bend toward my brother. His name is Connor. He's 29. He has a degree in business administration that he has never once used. He's lived in 4 different cities in the last 5 years, always with a reason why it didn't work out. The job market, a bad roommate, a girlfriend situation, the vibe. He called home every time he ran out of money, which was often. My parents called it going through a rough patch. He'd been going through the same rough patch since approximately 2018. I want to be clear, I didn't hate my brother. I didn't even dislike him exactly. I just understood, by the time I was in my mid-20s, that our family operated on a silent economy where Connor's needs were urgent and mine were assumed to be manageable. The equipment he'd sold, my father told me when he came home that evening, had gone to a woman down the street named Mrs. Aldridge, who apparently baked for her church and had been admiring my setup for years. My father had let her into the house while I was at work, let her pick through my kitchen tools like a yard sale, and handed everything over for $450 cash. $450. My stand mixer alone had cost $380. The marble rolling pin was $85. I had 2 sets of cake pans, aluminum, professional grade, that I'd bought in sets of 3 for $60 each. I had a digital kitchen scale, a pastry brush set, a bench scraper collection, a box of fondant smoothers. I had a custom order silicone mold set I'd had commissioned specifically for a client's recurring corporate order. That mold set alone had cost me $220. I did the math in my head while my father explained that Connor's rent was overdue and his landlord was going to file paperwork and they just needed to bridge the gap. $450 doesn't cover rent anywhere, I said. My father looked at me like I was being difficult. It helps. That's my equipment. That's how I make money. You can replace it. Dad. I custom ordered that mold set. It takes 6 weeks to make. I have a client order due in 3 weeks. He sighed. The particular sigh of a man who has decided your problem is smaller than you think it is. We'll figure it out, he said. And then he walked out of the kitchen. I didn't cry. I know that sounds strange, but I didn't. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at the empty counter where my mixer had been, and I felt something settle in me, cold and very clear. I had been soft with my family for years. I had been patient and accommodating, and I had told myself it was because I loved them. But standing in that kitchen, I understood for the first time that patience, when it's only ever going one direction, isn't a virtue. It's just a habit you mistake for one. I went upstairs to my room and I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was check the business bank account I'd set up for Wren's Custom Cakes, the LLC I'd registered 6 months earlier when a lawyer friend told me I should protect my income. Good thing I had. The business account had $4,200 in it from outstanding client invoices that had cleared that week. The second thing I did was text my friend Justine, who had a spare bedroom in her apartment on the east side and had offered it to me twice before when I'd vented about my home situation. "Is that room still available?" I sent. She replied in 4 minutes. "You're finally doing it. I'm doing it. It's yours. Come whenever." The third thing I did, and this is the part my family did not see coming, was look up Mrs. Aldridge's number in my mother's address book, which she kept in the kitchen drawer next to the landline phone she still insisted on having. I found it under A, in my mother's careful handwriting, Carol Aldridge, with a Raleigh number. I called her that night. She answered on the second ring, a warm voice, a little surprised to hear from me. I introduced myself. I explained the situation calmly, that the equipment she had purchased had been my personal property, that it had not been my father's to sell, that I was a working pastry professional who depended on that equipment for client orders, and that I was calling to ask if she'd be willing to sell it back to me. There was a pause. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. And then, I had a feeling something wasn't right. He seemed in too much of a hurry. We agreed on a price. I paid her back the $450 she'd spent, in full same day, via Venmo, plus an extra $50 because she'd been kind about it and because none of this was her fault. She had everything boxed up by the next afternoon. I borrowed Justine's car, drove over, and loaded it myself. My parents didn't know I'd contacted Mrs. Aldridge. They didn't know about Justine's room. They didn't know I'd already transferred my baking setup, every last tool, every pan, every specialty item, to Justine's apartment kitchen, which had better counter space anyway. What they knew on the morning 3 days later when my mother knocked on my bedroom door to call me for breakfast was that I wasn't in my room. My bed was made. My closet was empty. My dresser had been wiped clean. And the kitchen, when my mother came downstairs, was bare of anything that had belonged to me. I had taken the KitchenAid my grandmother had left me in her will. I had taken the set of copper-bottomed saucepans I'd bought at a restaurant supply auction. I had taken every ingredient that belonged to me, the 20-pound bag of King Arthur bread flour, the specialty cocoa powder I ordered from a supplier in Belgium, the 3 kinds of vanilla extract I kept for different applications. I had taken my recipe binders, my client folder, my custom order forms. I had taken the framed food safety certificate hanging on the wall, because I'd paid for the course and it had my name on it. I had also, and this part was deliberate, emailed every one of my active clients the night before to give them my new contact information, my new delivery address, and a note explaining that Wren's Custom Cakes was continuing operations without interruption from a new location. I had 12 active clients. All 12 replied within 24 hours, confirming their orders. My father called me at 9:45 in the morning. I let it ring. He called again at 10:03, then 10:17. I was sitting at Justine's kitchen table eating a bowl of cereal when my phone lit up the 4th time with his name. I turned it face down and finished my cereal. My mother texted, "Where are you? Your father is very upset." I thought about that message for a while. The way she'd framed it. "Your father is very upset." Not, "We're worried about you," or "Are you safe?" or "We owe you an apology." "Your father is very upset." As if his upset was the crisis. I typed back, "I'm fine. I've moved out. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." She sent 3 more messages after that. I read them without responding. My brother called 2 days later. I answered, because I was curious. "Wren," he said. He sounded genuinely surprised, like it hadn't occurred to him that actions might produce consequences. "What happened?" "Mom is losing it." "Dad sold my equipment," I said. I got it back and I left. Okay, but you didn't have to make a whole thing of it. Connor, I said. He sold my stand mixer to cover your rent. I didn't ask him to do that. I know, I said. And I did know. That was the strange part. My brother hadn't asked for this specifically. He just needed money. And my father had looked around for something to convert into money, and my things were there and available. That was the logic. That was the whole logic. I didn't ask him to, Connor said again. I know, I said, but you also didn't offer to get a second job, or apply for a payment plan with your landlord, or look into the rental assistance programs the state offers. You called home, and Dad solved it, and the solution happened to cost me. There was a long silence. That's not fair, he said finally. I know, I said. And then gently, I'll talk to you when things settle down. But I'm not coming home, Connor. Not because of you. Just because I can't keep living in a house where my stuff can disappear while I'm at work. He didn't have an answer to that. I hung up and went back to the kitchen where I had a 3-tier wedding cake to finish for a Saturday delivery. The next few weeks were difficult in the logistical sense and easier in every other sense. Justine's kitchen was smaller than my parents', but the counter space was workable and she kept her schedule clear on evenings when I had big orders. I picked up 2 new clients from a neighborhood Facebook group where someone had posted about needing a custom baby shower cake. I raised my prices by 15% because I'd been meaning to for a year, and the move had clarified for me that I had been undervaluing myself in multiple areas of my life simultaneously. I found a commercial kitchen space I could rent by the hour through a local culinary incubator program, $20 an hour, fully equipped, NSF certified. I booked 8 hours a week to start. My bigger orders, the tiered wedding cakes and the corporate stuff, I moved there entirely. The kitchen at Justine's became for smaller, faster orders and for testing new designs. My father left a voicemail 2 weeks after I left. I transcribed it in my notes app because I wanted to remember it accurately. He said he understood I was upset. He said what he'd done was wrong, and he knew that. He said he had written a check for $450 and he wanted to give it to me. He said he missed having me home. I sat with that voicemail for a few days. What he was offering was the $450. What was missing from the voicemail, and I listened to it 3 times to be sure, was any mention of the income I'd lost while I scrambled to recover my equipment, any mention of the client I'd had to call personally to explain the delay on her mold set order because the 6-week replacement I'd ordered still hadn't arrived, any mention of the 3 hours I'd spent on hold with my supplier trying to expedite the new set. Any mention of the fact that I was 26 years old and I'd built this business from nothing, from dishwashing shifts and late nights, and reinvested every dollar of profit back into equipment for 2 years, and he'd handed it to a neighbor for $450 in 20 minutes. I called him back on a Tuesday evening. I appreciate you acknowledging what happened, I said. I'll take the check. He sounded relieved. But I want to say something and I need you to actually hear it. I paused. You sold my property without asking me. That's not a parenting decision. That's not a judgment call about how to run your household. That is taking something that belongs to me. If a stranger had walked in and taken my mixer, you would have called the police. You know that. He was quiet. I'm not asking you to make it up to me financially, because you can't. I'm asking you to understand that what you did was not okay and that we needed the money for Connor is not a reason. It was never your money to spend. You're right, he said. His voice was different then, quieter, less offended. I know you're right. I know you love Connor, I said. I love him too. But you have made every problem he has into something I'm supposed to absorb, and I can't do that anymore. He didn't argue. He said he was sorry. He said it without qualification, without pivoting to how hard things had been or how much Connor was struggling. Just, I'm sorry, Wren. I should not have done that. It was the first time in my memory my father had apologized to me without an excuse attached. I picked up the check the following Saturday, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd grown up, drinking coffee with my mother while my father and I talked about nothing in particular for an hour. It wasn't fixed. A check and a conversation don't fix years of a family pattern, but something had shifted, and I could feel it. I did not move back home. I want to be clear about that. Justine and I decided to look for a 2-bedroom apartment together. Somewhere with a bigger kitchen, maybe in the Five Points area. We found one in February, 2nd floor of a Victorian house with a deep farmhouse sink and original wood floors and a kitchen that made me stand in the doorway and just breathe for a second. I'm writing this from that kitchen. There's a 3-tier champagne cake on the counter waiting for a ganache finish, and the stand mixer. My stand mixer is on the counter where it belongs. And when I look at it, I feel something I didn't have the words for before I left home. It's not happiness exactly, though I am happy. It's more like recognition, the feeling of being in a place that is actually yours, where the things you've built stay where you put them, where the work you do on Tuesday is still there on Wednesday. I talked to Connor last month. He's in Asheville now, working as an office manager for a small architecture firm. He found the job himself, applied without telling anyone, got it on his first interview. He texted me a photo of his desk on his first day. I sent back a string of celebration emojis and then I called him and we talked for 45 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of this. "I think you leaving," he said, near the end of the call. Kinda woke me up. Like I didn't realize how much everyone was compensating until there was no one left to compensate. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said I was glad he was doing well. And I meant it. My father sent me a photo last week of my grandmother's KitchenAid, the one I have here in my apartment, in a cake photo I'd posted online. He'd screenshotted it. Underneath, he'd typed, "She would have been so proud of you." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I typed back, "Thank you, Dad," and I went back to my cake. There's a thing I keep coming back to, even now. The morning I stood in that kitchen and looked at the empty counter where my mixer had been. I didn't fall apart. I think that surprised me more than anything else. I'd spent years believing that if my family ever really crossed a line, I would collapse. That I needed their approval the way you need a floor under your feet. But the floor held. It just turned out the floor was mine all along, not theirs. What happened to me was simple in the way that unfair things often are. My father needed money. He looked around for what was available, and my things were there. Not Connor's things. Not anything my parents had built or sacrificed for. Mine. The equipment I'd bought one piece at a time, with tip money and overnight shifts and years of reinvesting every dollar back into a business I was building from scratch. He sold it for $450 in 20 minutes, without asking, without warning, without a second thought. Because somewhere in the unspoken logic of our family, my effort was a resource that could be drawn on. My work was a family asset. My future was negotiable. I don't think my father is a bad person. I've thought about this a lot. I think he made a decision that felt, in the moment, like solving a problem, and he never stopped to ask whether the solution was actually his to make. That's not cruelty. It's something quieter and harder to name. It's what happens when one person in a family is allowed to coast, and another person is assumed to be capable of absorbing whatever the coasting costs. The part that changed things, for me, for my brother, maybe even for my father, wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't the dramatic moment when he discovered the empty kitchen. It was the decision I made quietly, sitting at my laptop at 11 o'clock at night, to call Mrs. Aldridge and get my equipment back, to text Justine, to email my clients, to act methodically and without anger, from the understanding that I had rights and that those rights didn't expire because I lived under someone else's roof. That's the thing I want to say plainly. Knowing what belongs to you and being willing to go get it back is not aggression. It's not disrespect. It requires a kind of clarity that takes years to build, a willingness to look at a situation honestly and say, "This is wrong and I am not going to arrange my life around pretending it isn't." Connor figured something out too eventually. He said it himself. That when I left, he had to stop relying on a system that had been quietly doing his growing up for him. I didn't leave to teach him a lesson. I left because I had to. But the cause and the effect held anyway. When you stop absorbing the consequences of someone else's choices, they have to start absorbing them themselves. That's not punishment. It's just reality, finally allowed to do its job. I'm in my own kitchen now. My mixer is on the counter. The cake I'm finishing is for a client who found me through a referral, from a client who found me the same way, in a chain of trust I built one order at a time. None of it would exist if I had stayed and kept being the kind of person who lets things go. That's the part no one tells you about standing up for yourself. It doesn't just change the situation. It changes you. And the version of you that comes out the other side, steadier, clearer, less willing to make yourself smaller, that person turns out to be worth quite a lot.